Yes, let's do it.
Okay, great. So again, good afternoon, everyone. We hope that you've had a good weekend and you're looking forward to this engaging discussion today on transitioning from the classroom to the studio. My name is Roman, and I have the pleasure of serving as the Vice President of the Board of Directors for Wild Goose Creative, this amazing community arts organization. I'm filling in for Executive Director Lydia Simon today, and also joined by Operations Coordinator Faye Drews. Hey, Faye.
Hi.
Also see several art scholars on the call today, which is great. During my day job, I serve as the Art Scholars Program Manager at Ohio State. And I know we have several other folks on the call, and there'll be a chance for introductions too at the start of the meeting today. So again, I'm excited for today's conversation with our panelists, including some of our neighbors in the Franklinton area, which is great. And obviously some students on the panel as well, who will be sharing their perspective on transitioning from the classroom to the studio, or really just to working in a creative field or working professionally in general. So without further ado, I'd actually like to introduce our wonderful moderator for this afternoon, Molly Seguin. If you'd like to introduce yourself and then maybe share some tips for how folks can communicate with one another during this conversation today, and then maybe introduce our panelists. That would be amazing. It's so great to have you.
It's so great to see you too, Roman. You're amazing too, so thank you so much. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Molly Seguin. I have the pleasure of being the moderator for these panels with Wild Goose Creative. But in my, 9 to 5 life, I work as the Director of Volunteer Experiences at COSI. So a little bit different than like a traditional creative field, but I'm so happy to be here. I tend to learn so much from these events, as Roman knows afterwards. I'm like, did you know this? Did you know that? Because I don't experience it every day. So I love learning right along with all of you. A couple general housekeeping items before we go ahead and get started. If you are an attendee today, please in the chat drop your name and any other information you'd like to include, just so we know who is on this call with us. If you have questions, please go ahead and feel free as we go along in today's program to drop them in the chat as well. We will try to get to them, but I definitely encourage you to reach out to our speakers if they are comfortable with it after today over any social media platforms that they might feel comfortable sharing, or LinkedIn, to follow up with your questions if we're not able to get to them today. We're going to have a pretty much free-flowing conversation, so there's no directly hard stop time other than 1 o'clock, but we traditionally like to get to questions around 12:45, 12:50. Other than that, I am going to ask that if you are not speaking, that you please mute yourself, so you can keep your camera on, but just mute yourself, just because we tend to get some echoes, but we want to see everyone's beautiful faces. We just want this to be a grade A recording for those who might be joining at a later date. So, got all those housekeeping items out of the way. So without further ado, I'm actually not going to introduce our panelists, because I'd like our panelists to introduce themselves. So panelists, we are going to get into your backgrounds a little bit more in depth later on in this conversation. So what I'd like you to do now is just give a quick 30-second overview, who you are, what you do, and if you're excited to be here today, what you're hoping to learn or what you're hoping to share. So in no particular order, just because she is on my screen, Carrie, would you like to kick things off?
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, everybody. Thanks for attending today. Yeah, my name is Carrie Bogenwright. I am a graphic designer and creative strategist. I work in the medicinal marijuana industry at the moment. And I also have a studio at 400 Westridge where I do ceramic work, ceramic sculpture, etc. So I'm really excited to see what you guys are getting into and share a little bit about my journey. Steph?
Awesome.
Yeah,
I can. Yep. Go ahead. Just keep talking.
Okay. I was gonna say I could introduce myself next if that's we could do that. Hi everyone. I'm Stephanie McGlone. I am the community director over at 400 Square, which encompasses 400 Westridge, like Carrie mentioned, Chrome Studios, and also Strongwater, the restaurant and event space. So basically, I help make it a really fun experience for folks to rent space, have events, and also to visit and do fun things. Yeah.
Thank you. Jessica or David, if one of you would like to go next, just feel free to jump in.
Hi, my name is Jessica. I currently work as a relationship banker and I'm getting my master's in clinical mental health counseling. I'm just excited to hear how everyone else is incorporating art into their everyday lives.
Cool. I'm David. I use he, him pronouns. I'm a student, full-time student right now at OSU. I am the senior student co-chair for Art Scholars, so that's how I know Roman. Yeah, I study creative writing and I'm a screenwriting minor.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And I do apologize. Thank you, David, for including your pronouns. I asked that in the chat, but I didn't ask our panelists to mention that. So my pronouns are she, her, hers. If our panelists feel comfortable sharing the next time we go around, please feel free to share that as well. So we're going to kick things off here. So I'm actually going to start, a lot of the questions I have are similar for both our students and our professionals, but I am going to start with our students. So Jessica and David, I was wondering, because you are both recent graduates, if you could talk a little bit about your educational career, what your area of study was. So was it, I know David, you mentioned it was specifically in arts, but Jessica, I know that you mentioned that you're getting a master's degree in something that's not traditionally a creative field. So talk a little bit about that and how you incorporated your art or your creative field in that area of study.
Well, David, do you want to go?
No, you can go. Go ahead.
So my pronouns are she, her, hers. My first, I've had many majors just trying to figure out what I wanted to do, but I ended up graduating with my bachelor's in communication studies, and I took a lot of art classes just as electives. I never did end up majoring in it, but I definitely decided to incorporate that after I graduated. During the pandemic, I started really getting into art and painting and stuff like that. So I began selling my paintings. So just after I graduated, I really, especially during COVID, just really relied heavily on that. So I kind of got into it outside of school, but it just kind of ended up coming together.
Yeah, and then for me, I am actually still a student. I graduate next semester, but I started at OSU as bio pre-med, and I did a semester of that, and I really wasn't enjoying myself, and like I kind of had a voice in the back of my head telling me to like do English, and because I would really enjoy it and be able to be creative and think creatively. So I switched, and then I applied into the creative writing concentration my sophomore year, and I got it very thankfully. So I've been doing creative writing workshops since then. I mostly do fiction. That's my primary focus. I love genre fiction as well. So that's what I'm all about. Also screenwriting. I also love that. It's a very interesting and different form, and I really like writing something in one form and then adapting it into the other, and then seeing how it translates and how that looks. It kind of, it's a fun way to look at stories, in my opinion. So that's what I've been all about in my educational career so far. But yeah, I'm graduating. I had been considering doing an MFA program in creative writing, but I'm doing a gap year now because I am trying to figure out that transition from the classroom to the studio that we're talking about. So yeah, that's where I'm at.
That's wonderful. Thank you both so much. I appreciate you opening up and sharing that journey. So Jessica, I'm sorry, we already went to Jessica, Carrie and Stephanie, same question. I am going to ask you later on a little bit more in depth about what you do day to day now, but for right now, I'm just curious, if you did go to college, what your major or area of study was in and how you picked that. Did you change a lot? Kind of walk us through that journey as well.
Yeah, I can kick us off. Yeah, so I went to the Columbus College of Art and Design. I majored in advertising and graphic design, but it was never like a thing that I knew what I was going to do off the bat. I was just like, hey, let's try this thing. It's kind of similar to psychology. I'm interested in the arts. Let's try it out. ended up working out for me. So I continued on that path with the copywriting minor. And then I went into experiential advertising straight after school. I worked in New York for a while until the pandemic hit, and then I came back to Columbus. But yeah, it's been really wonderful. I've never known exactly what I've wanted to do. I've always just kind of followed like the breadcrumbs kind of thing. And that's just kind of worked out for me up until this point. So like Carrie, I also went to CCAD. I came in with a fine arts major, but I don't think I had to like declare at that point. And so for some reason, I was like, you should probably try illustration. I feel like there's more jobs than that. That feels like a more financially sound idea. And then I quickly found out that I was no good at it, and I also had no desire to do it. And it was completely different than the mindset of a fine artist. And I give so much credit to illustrators, because that is a gift that I still am like, I really wish I could do it. But it is not the way my brain works. And so when I officially had to declare, I may have technically declared illustration, and like right before the cutoff, I was like, just kidding, go back to fine arts. So that is what I stuck with. I graduated in 2014 with my fine arts degree, but at CCAD, I always kind of giggle because you get a bachelor in fine arts, but my concentration was also fine arts. So it's like a BFA in FA. And I'm happy with that. I'm happy that I did that, but I really did kind of in school, I explored a lot of different mediums. I ended up really focusing with kind of this mixed media, like collage with painting sort of work that I still do now. But I definitely struggled with kind of finding like, what was it? I felt a lot of pressure to find like, what is your medium and what are you going to work in? And so kind of with that, it led me to understand that I was probably not somebody who was always going to be a full-time artist. And that the like finished product of art wasn't necessarily what I was after. It was more about that making process and that engagement. I was constantly trying to engage with the other artists or go to places and look at art. Like that sort of conversation about art was really what I was after. And at that time, CCD didn't really have a major for that. So I had my minor in art history, but it wasn't exactly what I was like, still didn't like totally tick it off for me at that.
Stephanie, I so relate to you. Even though I wasn't an art student, at one point in college, I thought I wanted to be a nutritionist because I was like, who work in hospitals and I really wanted to help people and I could make these nutrition plans for children. And then they told me I had to take like chemistry and I was like, oh, my brain doesn't work that way. I am so jealous of people that can think like that. So even though that wasn't directly arts, I think a lot of people can relate to that because that's part of the journey, and going to get a higher degree is exploring things that you in theory would really love to do, but then also coming to terms with what you're just able to do. I am not able to take chemistry, and so therefore I can't make nutrition plans for children in hospitals, but I love people that can do that. So students, Jessica and David, I'm curious if COVID affected your educational experience in any way, for better, for worse, different. That's a little off of our main conversation topic, but I'm just curious how COVID affected you both.
For me, I graduated in 2020. So right as COVID hit, we were evacuated. We had to pack up and leave with a moment's notice. So it was actually pretty difficult to find a job right after graduating, as well as just kind of figuring out what I wanted to do, because that was kind of expedited. So it definitely changed like the latter half of my senior year, not being able to walk and have a graduation, but it definitely was a unique experience that I think not everyone had.
For me, it kind of hit right when I was on the internship search, and particularly for the film industry. And that was hit pretty hard. So that sucked and made it very difficult. But other than that, it's difficult for writing because it's like a lonely process. And before that, it was fine because it's like, okay, I have my normal life. I'll hang out with my friends, and when I'm alone, I can be creative, do that. But yeah, COVID really throws that off, and like it's still working on it. So I don't know. COVID just makes you lonely, which is already a factor of writing. So the creativity is stifled sometimes, but I think it's like a good thing. At the end of the day, I think it's been a good experience to kind of really test you and see how serious you are about your art form.
David, I think you bring up a really good point in that a lot of these conversations that we're having month to month, part of being a creative and creating is so that other people can enjoy it in most cases. And I think you bring up a really good point about how COVID, you can still create and be dedicated to your craft, but at some point, that sharing aspect is really important, not just for the art itself, but also for everyone's kind of mental health and balancing that. So thank you for sharing that. I think that's really a really interesting point. So Carrie and Stephanie, diving a little bit deeper into after you both graduated from CCAD, what did your job searching process look like? Did you just get either a part-time or a full-time job that wasn't in your area of study? Or did you just go straight into the creative field? What were other job searching platforms that you used, if any, either in person or online? I would be curious to hear about that.
Steph, do you want to kick it off? Sure. So when I graduated, so before I graduated, I was lucky enough that I was working at the art museum, right, next door to CCAD. So I had actually started an internship there at the end of my freshman year. And then around junior year, I got hired on part-time. And so I was continuing my senior year. I think I became somewhere between my senior year, I became full-time. So I did that for a bit of time. And then I actually ended up moving a couple of times around. I was in my relationship of I'm sorry, I heard a dog barking in the background. My husband now, we were engaged at the time. And so we kind of were floating around the country. He was doing different internships too. And so I was fortunate enough that post graduating and then after the art museum, I still worked right in the beginning, at least, mostly creative fields. So I was interning at a couple different art museums around the country. I did a couple in Austin, and then I was doing some work in Rochester, New York, and one of their art museums. But around like a year after I graduated, I was really struggling to sort of like find something that fit for me. So I started taking on some other odd jobs. So I started doing a lot of like daycare work, or I did some freelance. So I was still able to do some creative things. And then around 2016, I moved back to Columbus and was like, I'm gonna work back at the art museum. I'm getting right back into everything. Here it is. I was like, no, that is not working. You will not be doing that. And so I tried to kind of find something that would work for me, even if that meant I had to do like a little extra creative puzzling. So I actually began to work in healthcare. I worked at a day program for adults with disabilities. And I was, again, kind of lucky enough to stumble upon this with art friends who were also doing that. And so they said, like this program was flexible enough that they can incorporate their backgrounds into it. So while most people heard, it's an adult day center and this, whatever comes to mind in terms of like activities that you're doing, we were able to bring our backgrounds in and say, well, great, well, we're going to run the art studio. And so I had a couple of friends and I created a whole art program there. And from there, I sort of like moved up to do art coordinating there and led like a little bit of a team. And did that for a while until I got to my current job. So I like to think that I was lucky enough to mostly work in a creative field post-graduating, but it wasn't always, I had to get a little creative to make that stick. I wasn't always in a naturally creative field.
And I mean, for me,
I've been incredibly fortunate. At the beginning, straight after college, things kind of worked out. So my junior year of college, I learned what experiential advertising was, which is this niche of advertising that talks about kind of creating more of a, connective experience for your consumer. So that it's like immersive, like experience, it's pop-ups, it's events. Initially just like hyper creative advertising, right? Which is like my jam. I was really excited about it. So my junior year of college, I did the thing where I sent like 5 million emails out. And I just like happened to get an internship in New York, because if you look at the Columbus market, experiential advertising, I was like, oh, I'll get an internship in Columbus. It'll be great. And then you look into it and there's not really many opportunities in the field. So then what do you do? Like, is it okay to find something here? Do you leave? So I ended up moving for the summer, interning at a firm, and I was incredibly fortunate. They reached out to me a couple months before I graduated and they hired me, which was wonderful. And it was really interesting. I did that for 2 years. And then the pandemic hit and the events industry got like slapped in the face. So I was a graphic designer there, also did creative conceptualizing events and things like that. And so when that happened, our entire team was laid off. And, I came back to Columbus just to stay with my mom and not be in an epicenter of a pandemic. And then that turned into me staying at her house for a year, trying to find work. And so that was interesting in that, like, okay, well, now I'm back in a market where like events are off. My entire skill set is like dashed. Like, I don't know how to do anything else. Now I'm in a market, I can do graphic design, but it's not really like, not kind of agency life. Graphic design wasn't exactly what I wanted. So it took some time to like relearn and kind of look at like, okay, what is the makeup of what I'm interested in? And how can that wear a different outfit and like exist in a market that's like a little bit different than like what I'd anticipated and kind of set myself up for, especially being like very ambitious. So now I happened into this job where I'm a graphic designer for, a couple cannabis brands and a CBD brand. And it is like incredibly creatively fulfilling in ways that I wouldn't have expected if I just like gotten to go and choose like, hey, I'm just going to take what I do there and move it here. So I've been here since then. It's been really wonderful. So.
Well, I will say, starting off, Carrie, I'm so sorry that you had a whirlwind of a 2020, but we're happy you're back in Columbus and we're happy that you're safe. And it sounded like it all worked out. So we're glad, but that does sound like a lot going on. Stephanie, one of the things that I wrote down that you said was getting creative, and I wrote get creative in work. Or get creative to work in creative rather. And I think something that you both mentioned was internships, which we had a business of art way back, I think maybe 1 or 2 months ago, that focused on that. But I think it's really important that, Carrie, you said, if you were just pick a job out of a lineup, like, oh, art, click that. Like, I want that, rather than having experiences that both you and Stephanie have had that have led you down a path of, this might not be a art internship or an art job, but I was creative enough to make it into something that worked for me. And I know that working with interns specifically at COSI, something that I always say is that your resume should tell a story. It doesn't have to always be a fairy tale, and it doesn't always have to necessarily make sense, but at the end, it should all tell a story of, I went here and then I went here and this is why. And I remember with my collegiate internship, I got it because I was sitting at a 4th of July parade and someone in the field that I wanted to be in was sitting behind me, and I just outright asked her if her agency had an internship. And then from there, I learned, like, everything kind of took off. So I wrote down get creative to work in creative, which I think you both showed. So thank you so much. We really appreciate that. And again, we're all happy that you're safe and healthy and working after COVID. So for my students, Jessica and David, I'm wondering what advice you would give to high school seniors who are interested or on the fence about majoring or minor in the creative field, or just have a general interest. So Jessica, if someone says, I want to take a lot of art classes, but I don't necessarily want to major in it, what advice would you give? Or David, if someone says, I'm not sure if I want to or not, because I don't know what path it's going to take me down. I'm curious, based on your more recent experience, what you would have to say.
I think I would say to definitely just do it. Like, especially in the earlier stages of your college degree and career, like you have so much wiggle room to just try different things and to see what you love and to see what you want to do, and to not just be so focused on, okay, what's going to, you know, make the most money, what's going to do this, what's going to do that. I think it's so beneficial to have a creative outlet, especially when, you know, exams are coming around and finals, and, you know, college can be tough sometimes, and you need that creative outlet, especially if that's something that makes you feel free and makes you feel light. And so I think it's just a really, really, really great idea. I would definitely tell anyone to just not get in your head so much about it and just do what will help you clear your mind as much as you can in college.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with what Jessica said. Just sort of do it. But also, I mean, with a minor, I think I'm assuming that this like potential person would not be in the art field. I think like, you know, arts minors are absolutely beneficial for your resume as well. So and a lot of them can be pretty low stakes. Like I know the screenwriting one isn't many credit hours at all. So sort of just, I say just go for it with a minor. But for a major, that's definitely a bigger decision. And I think you do need to be honest with yourself and kind of consider, like, is this something that I want to do long term? Do you see longevity in it? Is this sort of maybe more of a hobby at the moment? And then you do need to consider that. I would maybe, like, for a more practical approach, you would want to talk to people in the major, especially if you know anybody. If not, I think especially with the arts, at least my experience with English has been the advisors are really amazing and will talk to you kind of whenever. So they're very, very approachable. I would highly recommend talking to advisors if you're considering. Especially, I imagine it's the same for many of the other arts fields. Like I know film studies does a very similar thing. So look into talking to advising. They're better than the chem department, in my opinion.
Wow, I wish you guys were my friends back when I was in college, a full decade ago. Because I searched around a lot, but I think what you both said is really valuable information. A lot of it is, Jessica, I feel like you're like the hype girl. You're like, just do it, just take the plunge, explore. And I think a lot of people, especially today, are like, what's going to make me the most money? What's going to get me on the fastest track? Or, you know, what's gonna make, you know, David, you know, maybe I'm gonna pick an art field that's gonna get me shown in front of hundreds of thousands of people versus what I actually like to do. So actually, David, I'm not a good creative writer, and my creative writing class was very difficult for me. So I wish that I could have had you next to me being my hype person in that. But thank you both for sharing those stories. I think it's really important. You both have a lot of great advice and positive outlooks on things. So that's a breath of fresh air. Carrie and Stephanie, if we kind of go up a little bit, and if we have collegiate seniors who are kind of nervous about graduating, not sure how to take the plunge. I know you both just shared your kind of career exploration lifespan and how you ended up where you are today. But what advice would you give to college graduates searching for jobs either in the creative field or not ready to take the plunge in that out of fear that they might not make a livable wage? And how can, let's say someone, you know, has a job that's not in the creative field, how would you encourage them to keep up with their creative process? It's kind of a multi-layered question. So if you need me to repeat anything, just let me know.
Yeah, absolutely. I think my biggest piece of advice kind of goes along with what I was saying in terms of my own kind of professional journey, is that, you know, be very like receptive to opportunities. Like you might have an idea about like exactly how your path is going to look like and what like job you need to choose, but kind of be open to anything that comes to you, and know that like your path doesn't necessarily have to be completely linear for you to be quote unquote successful. So like, taking up, something that, might be like a little office, okay, for a bit, if you're thinking, there's always ways to get back to it. So just be open to what comes up. And then on the other end of that, from a creative perspective, and I've experienced this just working in advertising, is that if you work in a creative field or not, you need like an exterior creative outlet to offset. If you're getting all of your creative like energy and you're putting all into your job, you're going to get burnout really quickly, and like that's going to kind of control your mood. So that's another recommendation for like any creatives that are in the workplace, is that kind of, have your creativity that like belongs to you, but also like have it exist in the wild as well. I think that's everything, right? I think that sounds good. No, I agree with what Carrie said. And I would add that I think for one of the biggest pieces of advice that I didn't understand, I think was like advice until recently, where I figured out that it was more important to me to, instead of thinking like, this is the job I'm going to have, this is the role I'm going to take, this is the position I'm going to have. It was like, this is the place I want to work. This is the people I want to work with. And and thank you, Carrie. I think that it became really apparent to me that like, I wasn't really picking jobs. I wasn't even really applying for jobs that I knew were like, oh yeah, this sounds perfect. This is definitely what I want to do, because that's really hard to find. I mean, everything is going to have those ups and those downs, and a job, you joke when you go to an interview and you say all these things you can do, and maybe you don't really do them, but like a job is posting the same thing. A job is going to say you're going to do all of these wonderful things. And then you get in there and you're like, that's part of my job. That's definitely other things that I have to do that I wasn't expecting. And that's super normal. So I think finding a place that you feel really confident in and you can grow, and I think you want people to sort of challenge you. So you don't want everybody the same, but having an anchor, I think, of somebody else who thinks the same way you do, who's maybe a little bit higher up, like kind of a mentor idea, that has always been super great for me. So again, like at the art museum, I was like, I'm going to do a curatorial internship. And it was like, I think I applied for it, I didn't get it, but I got into the education department. And I was like, I don't understand that. I don't get it. But I met somebody there who I'd work with, and she changed everything for me. She was somebody who taught me about that engagement with arts and people, and how to talk about it, how to play with it, how to experiment. And then suddenly everything got shaped for me. So I sort of could follow her along, and then she encouraged me to do my own path. And so we could go side by side on times. And again, those interpersonal relationships are like what I carried with me to another place, to another museum, which led me to a kind of studio setting, to a non-traditional setting. I mean, like I've worked in a bunch of different places, but the most successful places I've had are the ones whose mission I believed in, and the team that I really got along with and connected with.
Oh my gosh, we're just dropping so many good sound bites today that are just like so inspirational. I mean, if this doesn't set our work week off on the best foot, I don't know what will. So Carrie, I wrote down that success is not linear, right? So I think that's a great tidbit of information that, especially, and I will give myself as an example, like I went in thinking I was going to be a social worker, right? And I was like, to be a social worker, you have to do this, that, and the other. And then once you do this, you're a good social worker. And that is a good social worker. And I will have made it to the highest mountain. And like, that's not how life in general works. And so I think the younger you are when you figure that out, the better, because I was on this like path, and I'm not a social worker now, and I'm super happy. And it's probably best that I'm not a social worker, because I'm still using my skills. And like Stephanie said, I found people that I could relate to, maybe not directly in a job sense, but in a, like, you don't have to have you don't have to be a gallery curator to be successful in the art world. You don't have to be a fashion designer putting clothes on the runway to be successful in art. There's so many other facets to it. What else did I write down? I wrote, to avoid burnout, find a creative outlet that belongs to you outside of your work. And I think that's actually super important in any field whatsoever. Like, again, just speaking for myself, since I can only speak for myself, if I did science all the time in my personal life, right, and then went to work and did a bunch of science-based activities, like that's a grade A burnout potion right there. So I think creative outlets for anyone, even people who aren't directly in the creative field is super, super important too, but finding something that's yours and your own and not judged or bought or priced or things like that. That's a great piece of advice. I also wrote, Stephanie, you mentioned this, the impact you want to have is bigger than the title you hold. So it's not about so much of, I am a fashion designer, so therefore I am art. It's what's the impact you want to have, or what's the feeling you want to leave when you leave work in the day, after the day, that makes you feel like you're fulfilling your passions and what you like and what you've studied and what you've worked for. It doesn't have to be a title of. I tell people all the time, a director at one place can mean something different than another place. For instance, like my partner, where he works, it goes like coordinator, program coordinator, manager, program manager. And then if you're a director, like you run multiple departments, where in my line of work, I'm a director and I run one department. And so like, if he says, oh, I just got a promotion to a program coordinator, that it would be a starting position where I work. So I tell people don't pay attention to titles anyways, but more so how you feel and the impact that you have. And then I also wrote down having a mentor you can bounce ideas off of too. I know we did a business of art about the importance of mentorship. And I think that has something that's come up a lot, especially in 2020, is finding the people who you can bounce ideas off of in a non-judgmental way, who can help guide you. And sometimes a mentor is, oh, I don't want to do it the way they did it, or I'm looking for something different. So great pieces of information there. So I want to keep talking to Stephanie and Carrie real quick. Carrie, about how you mentioned about finding an outlet. You do creative work, direct work in your day-to-day. So can you talk a little bit about the outlets that you hold? And Stephanie, I'm interested as well. You are in this art space that so many people see as an artistic community, but you might not be creating every day, right? Like you're working with people like me who want to have their weddings maybe at Strongwater or host other events. So how do you keep your creative up front, or how do you create, I guess, is what I'm trying to ask.
Yeah. Well, that was definitely hard-won knowledge on my part. I mean, my first job in advertising, part of it was a really unhealthy work environment. I was working until 9 p.m. every night, or like into the wee hours of the morning. And so if you have somebody like, I don't know if anybody else is like this, but I have like this really like demanding creative energy, right? And it only had like one place to go in this job. And I found really quickly that like my job, like how things were going on at work, was just like controlling me emotionally from like a creative perspective. And that's, that's not okay, because work, needs to be like, a piece of your life, but you work to live, you don't live to work. So, yeah, when I moved back to Columbus, it kind of like, I stumbled back into it. I did ceramics all throughout high school. It's how I got a scholarship to CCAD through my ceramic work, and then just like booked into advertising because I was like, yeah, that makes sense for money. Like that's why I made that decision. And then I never touched play for years and years and years. And then I came back to Columbus after like losing my job, and like, I'm like, what kind of creative am I if I don't have this outlet that I've been trained in for several years? And so I kind of went back home to it, and really invested in sculpting. It just became very like cathartic for me. And Stephanie, like I have a Studio 400. I talk to Stephanie about this all the time, about like, it's not necessarily that I want to even sell that work. It's just like, it's just so personal. So it's nice to have like a medium that is different from, right now I'm a graphic designer. So different from me, having exterior design projects, or even little creative projects that kind of are similar to what I'm doing every day. I think the difference is important. And that it's personal. I don't feel like I need to post on Instagram all the time about it. It's just kind of like my own thing. So yeah, I think that in many ways I've kind of done something similar with Carrie is about, sort of a traditional like creative outlet. I still do collage, or I still just like sketch and draw, and I try to paint sometimes, and I do that kind of whenever it comes up, and I've got that creative energy, because I think that, right, being surrounded by artists all the time and sort of managing the space that I do, it lends itself to all these like kind of cool and fun and exciting art things, but it's not usually me doing it. I usually have to sort of just like oversee or allow it to happen, or things like facilitate it in a way. So I'm not the one who gets, like, a lot of times like the 90% of the painting I do is like painting the gallery wall, which sometimes I'm like, it's almost like I'm doing art. But I come home and then I said, like, I'll pop on a TV show and then I just do something to do it. Like, I get my hands moving. But I also think what helped me is sort of breaking my brain a little bit of like the creative. Like, for me, I can't just create as in physically create something. I am a person who, like, I compare it to what everyone else is making. And so I've sketched this lovely little thing, and then I'm on the internet. I'm like, oh my God, everyone's already better. And I'm not selling it. I'm not posting it. Why would I? I'm not showing it, exhibiting it. I'm just making. So sort of to kind of like break that part, I remind myself that, like, creativity is not just drawing or painting or making something, and it's that thinking like an artist, which is something I was taught with my mentor. That was like her phrase, was like, think like an artist. And so a lot of times I feel like I'm practicing my creativity and sort of getting that energy out through like problem solving things at work, or coming up with really random ideas of things to try, again, that are not traditional, like, we are going to put up this painting, or I'm going to make this painting, but maybe it's an engaging activity I'm going to have folks do, or a game I'm having people play without knowing it when they come into the building, things like that, like things where I'm like, I'm going to just try something, I'm going to experiment. That helps me sort of get that creative energy out.
Fantastic. So last question here. I know Jessica had to hop off. I did send her a message letting her know that we appreciated her being here today. And I would encourage everyone to look her up on social media if you'd want to connect with her further. But David, you mentioned that you're currently taking a gap year. Is that correct?
I will be, yes.
You will be. That's right, after you graduate. I'm curious if you can share a little bit about that decision process and what drove you to take that gap year, if you know anyone else taking a gap year, and then we'll go ahead and wrap up.
Sure. Is my internet on? Can you hear me?
We can hear you. It's a little splotchy.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So yeah, I came to this decision. I was talking to my professors about a grad program, and one of my professors was really great, and he kind of was talking to me realistically about what it would be like, and he was, didn't say it in particular, but he was strongly recommending a gap year to really write independently as well, and to get, work on your craft outside the school setting, and not just that, but like work a job that might not be the most entertaining, and continue to write, and to see what that's like and what it would realistically be like, assuming that it's difficult, or there's a time where you can't be living off of that creative work. So I figured that my application piece in particular into an MFA program would only be stronger if I give it time to write independently and to really work on my own and see what I like to write, instead of necessarily something that's kind of being prescribed by a workshop, and whether it be kind of what I think that needs to be written about, or if it's a special topic for the workshop or anything like that. So I kind of came to the conclusion, because I felt like my application won't be any weaker. If anything, it'll be stronger by the next time, and that it'll help me once I finally get to grad school, because like my professor was mentioning, it's like you get one chance at it. So you got one chance to do grad school, and make sure you are ready, and you want to, like, you're 100%, and that's what you want to do. And yeah, I have known people who have done similar things. I had people in my workshops like a year ahead of me who, like, with the same professor, who did the same thing, who are even better writers than I am, I would say. So I felt like I was confident in the decision, and I still am. I'm looking forward to it, and I think I'll get to learn a lot about myself during the time.
That's Awesome. Well, congratulations on all the success you've had already. And I know that everyone on this call is supportive and can't wait to see what you do, and just best of luck. That's amazing. We are right on schedule, folks. So thank you everyone for talking concise, but also getting the message out that we wanted. We're so appreciative of everyone today. I'm going to go ahead and ask our speakers if they can drop in the chat how we can connect with you offline. So off this call, whatever you're comfortable sharing, any websites you'd like to promote or your work or any events that you might have coming up. I'm going to share Jessica's information to everyone right now. That is her Instagram account. And then if anyone has any questions, feel free to either raise your hand in the chat and Roman and I will try and get to you, or type your question out. But in the meantime, I will just say if we can give a virtual applause to our speakers today, Carrie, Stephanie, David, and Jessica. Thank you so much for being here. We are so appreciative. Such wonderful conversations you all brought today. I know that it can be really hectic around this time of year, but I want to thank you all for being here, and especially our guests. Thank you all for being here as well. And Roman, right now, I'm going to turn it back to you if that's okay.
That's wonderful. Actually, again, thank you so much. Can we also have a round of applause, virtual applause for Molly for these great questions and for moderating so professionally and kindly. I did actually see there were a few questions or comments during the introduction period, the initial introductions. There were some questions about the arts. So here's one from Sarah. And thank you, Sarah, for submitting this. So Sarah loves to make music and would like to learn about how Columbus artists connect with one another, especially for collaborations and community events. It seems like the perfect panel of folks to maybe bring this up to.
I'm going to jump in on this and say, Sarah, that's awesome. And I think that having either your own space to work in, like at 400 Westridge or something like that, or engaging in the events that happen there. And so that's, you know, Franklinton Fridays is perfect, but also just like between Wild Goose and like Roy G. Biv and 400, we're always trying to do things together, like random festivals or workshops and things like that. So engaging in more of those, you will meet more creatives and find ways to collaborate.
And then there was also another, unless there was a comment from Carrie, anything additional? Okay, good. Okay, great. There was also a comment from Leah, which was, again, Leah enjoys spending time reading and writing, which is great. Definitely connect with David, Leah. And is hoping to learn about how business and the arts can intertwine. If anyone would like to comment on that.
Ooh, I mean, I work in advertising, so so that's that. Yeah, I think there's a lot of opportunity for the arts in business. I think that a lot of times when people think about, you know, working in the arts in general, they're thinking about like painting or something like that. Even like going to art school, that's what people would ask me, like, how's your painting class going? I'm like, yeah, there. I mean, everything around us is arts, and you know, so many companies need that eye, whether it's interior graphic or something like that's more corporate, or even just, you know, anthropology needs somebody for their window displays. You know what I'm saying? So yeah, there are endless opportunities, and like you can make good money on it, you know, that's sustainable as well. So I would also echo with what Carrie is saying, and add in, right, that you there are so many more options. I'm speaking, I guess, from a history of a visual arts, but especially like coming from CCAD, where at that time, a lot of what I was hearing as a fine artist and a visual artist was, right, you're going to work full time as an artist, or you're going to teach. And I was like, I don't want either of them. What else is there? And so, you know, kind of as we talked about before, just those opportunities and saying yes to just trying a lot of places and finding that fit. I realized how many more jobs there were in the arts and in those creative fields than were just, you know, presented to me at that time. So I said it kind of takes a little like digging and maybe like some wiggle room, but I think that generally there in every place there is room for someone who thinks like an artist and thinks creatively.
And then lastly, there was one more actually question that's similar, but not exactly the same, was, and this is a big question. This could be its own business of art discussion. but how to start a business in the arts. So rather than just like arts and business overlap, like how could one, what are maybe some good resources or some good initial thoughts on how one could start a business in the arts?
Roman, I think we just found our topic for January. Entrepreneurship in the new year.
Well, I can say, you know, I don't have a small business myself per se, but there are, I kind of in line with what we just spoke about, what Stephanie mentioned before, is just like lean on your community. Like, especially if you're looking to like go into like selling goods or something within that space, there are a million people in our community that are doing that already, and they've been where you're at, and they'll be able to give you like information on how to look forward. So even if it's like, you know, dropping by Franklinton and like meeting people and asking them questions and things like that. And typically, if you've been through it, you're like very eager to like help somebody else, like to help like a younger you. So like having any anxiety about reaching out, like that is like, you know, completely unnecessary. Typically people are really excited to help. So go ahead and like, yeah, lean on your community, do your research, and just know that like, you know, everything will work itself out. Like your things will come to you. You don't have to figure everything out at the get. I had a friend recently who was talking about like the process of finding a new job, sort of being the series of questions you ask yourself of kind of like, where is the importance? And so for some people, it's like, what is, you know, is it important for you to do something with a strong mission? Is it important for you to do something that is going to make a lot of money? And like, there's no shame in that game. We kind of need to make money to live and to do things. So is it about that work environment and that balance? So I think starting at a point where you ask yourself, where does my focus need to be? And then combining that with what you know you do well. Those are like, I think, good places to start off. And then you sort of find out, okay, well, how do I take what I do well and what I know I need and fill these gaps that I'm seeing within the community?
Roman, I was just going to say thanks for taking over the question and answers, because I was busy following all of our panelists on Instagram. So thank you. I apologize to everyone for dropping the ball on that, but great questions and great answers and right on time. So again, Roman, I'll pass it over to you. I just want to let our panelists know they're all going to get pings from me following them on Instagram. So
that's the dream right there. One quick question for Stephanie and Carrie is there anything coming up in 400 that folks should be aware of? Anything exciting coming up next week or two or month, or feel free to share.
I like Carrie's like, it's funny on my screen, Carrie's very directly pointing at me. And so, and Roman, yours too. Like this is like, I'm right in between. So Franklinton Fridays is our big open house. So that's the second Friday of each month from 6 to 10 p.m. We just had our December one, which actually went all weekend long, but January's will be just on that Friday, which I think is the 14th, if I'm correct. And then otherwise, there are people hosting, like coming in and hosting public and pop-up events, much like they do at Wild Goose. So I would stay on Instagram through 400 Square and 400 West Rich to find out if there's something else besides Franklinton Fridays that might like pop up.
I just want to put a plug to that these individuals on our panel are great people to ask or to go through to buy local for the holiday season. So we have A+ people here who know who to hook you up with, if not themselves, other people to connect with to buy things for your loved ones or for yourself.
With that, I just want to say thank you so much to Molly, to Carrie, to Stephanie, David, Jessica. Thank you, Jessica, for sharing all your perspectives today, and also to all our guests on the call. Hopefully this was I think this was a very engaging conversation, hopefully also informative. Be sure to visit the Wild Goose Creative calendar at wildgoosecreative.com/events, where you can learn more about things we have coming up. Even just this week, we have Figure Drawing, Queer Community, Mike Night, Art of Yoga, and many other events. We also have our membership drive running through December 31st. So much of the reason why we're able to do all the programming that we do is through our really supportive members. So if you're interested in joining, be sure to go to wildgoosecreative.com/support, share with your friends and family. And again, thank you so much to everyone for being here. Hope you enjoy the rest of your week, and hope to see you Wild Goose and 400 here shortly.
Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you, everybody. Thanks for